history of Ladbroke Grove I think is fundamental to the history of this country, whether the country likes it or not.
For me, round here was like the first melting pot because of the music and the blues dances.
There's a sense of freedom in this area, a sense of life, a sense of belonging. What more do you need?
My name's Diane Burstein, I'm a London Blue Badge guide. The tour that we're going to be doing today is a tour of Notting Hill, concentrating on the history and also the multicultural nature of Notting Hill, looking at all the different groups of people who've come to live here over the years.
My name is Colin Prescott. I have lived in Ladbroke Grove, North Kensington, since 1958, in the very same house. I still live in the house that my mother brought me to in 58. I'm 63 years old now. I first came to Ladbroke Grove when I was 13 from the Caribbean.
I first came to live in Ladbroke Grove in 1971, and at that point in this area, the area was predominantly occupied by Irish people and people from the Caribbean.
Well, I've been living in West 9 for 43 years, and over the years, I've also seen many changes.
I'm living in Notting Hill Gate, part of London, and I really like this area because there are very many different communities here and different flavours of different people.
For a long time it's been a diverse community place. Before the, quotes, black-skinned people arrived, there were Irish people here, there were Poles here, there were people who might have been called of Jewish extraction here. The new black populations that began to settle here in the 1950s came here because it was already a place where it was known that in-migrants, people arriving in the city and trying to find cheap places to settle for the first time, would go there.
In 1948, you had the famous ship, the Empire Windrush, that arrived in Britain from Jamaica.
I was born here. My parents have been here from the 40s. They were here as part of the war, end of the war effort. Second World War, that is.
And they found that when they were wearing an army uniform or an Air Force uniform, that people had treated them with respect. But unfortunately, they found that when they returned here, they weren't treated with quite the same respect. In fact, they were treated with quite a lot of hostility.
My dad was a bus driver and my mother was a nurse, and of course many of the new people from the Caribbean at that time went to work in transport and in the health services. We needed people to come drive our buses, our trains, to work in our hospitals. The country was short of people, and of course what lots of people didn't know is that the people from the Caribbean not only had British citizenship but also were invited to come here to help to build the country up after the war. And that's something a lot of people didn't know at the time. Papers didn't talk about those kind of things, and education didn't educate children to understand them.
I came to England seeking work. I'm a plumber by trade. Life wasn't very easy. The Teddy Boys era, one had to be always on the lookout because they always out to create trouble for the immigrants, people like me.
I remembered when I came here, 1965, the age of 17, my first recollection was my father asked me the following morning son, would you please go across the road to the newspaper shop? When I went to the paper shop and I saw some adverts in the window, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. When I went in and I told my father, he said, son, that's the way it is in England.
When Irish people first came to this country, and we mainly built all the roads here, of course, it was a case with landlords when they were looking to rent properties to live in, a room, a bedsit, whatever, small or grotty, because they were very grotty. I think it was the same thing. There were notices up everywhere. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs. It was an appalling way to treat people.
If I let you come in, all my boys would leave.
If you let me come in?
If I let you come in, all the other ones would go.
Yes. Okay,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Where did these racial tensions come from? How did they arise? And you have to look into the big history, the deep history of Britain to understand that racism is part and parcel of how Britain made empire. The ruling classes of Great Britain had sown racism into the working classes in this country to make them feel they were superior to other people had to serve them. So when they arrive here, amongst other people, the people who had been brought up thinking that they were white thought that it was okay to be prejudiced against people who looked black.
It was difficult to find accommodation in the first place because lots of the adverts, they would say that no blacks. There are times when you'll be called names, but sometimes there are people that would react, others would just ignore it, like.
One of the landlords who was willing to rent out apartments and properties to people was a man who was known as Peter Rackman.
Well, from what my mum told me, because my mum was actually a tenant of his, he was an unscrupulous, low-life, shady landlord.
In a way, Peter Rackman's got a very bad rep, and he carries this for a lot of other people, because there were many bad landlords in the area.
He'd find people that were homeless or they was overcrowded and tell them, I've got rooms for you to rent. And then when they'd come and view the room, he'd let them rent the room for a certain amount of money one week. Then the next week he'd double the money, or he'd bring someone else in overnight and say he's sharing the room with you.
If you didn't pay, and mostly it was black people in those days, if you didn't pay, he used to say, he begged men to get you out or put dogs on you and all of that he used to do. Yeah, he used to run around here a lot, you know, because we call them crooks.
Whenever he wanted to change the people in a house, he would get very heavy with people. Yes, he would send heavies in and so on.
And organisations that we have today in Notting Hill, like the Notting Hill Housing Trust, started off as a reaction against bad landlords like Rackman. Now, back in 1958, you had Oswald Mosley. He decided that he would try and establish himself here in Notting Hill. He did whip up unrest, and 1958 was the year of the Notting Hill riots.
The cause of this riot was because one section of the community that couldn't accept, they didn't want to accept that. So they created a lot of problems for the people from inside.
Well, they have no choice but to mix. They started it. They went to Africa and took our foreparents and put them into slavery.
You had the Teddy Boys, who were the white boys who used to dress up in Edwardian-style jackets. They would come down looking for trouble with the local young black people, starting fights, attacking people's homes and businesses.
There were lynch mobs. A lynch mob isn't a mob that hangs people. A lynch mob is a mob of people that attacks people for no reason on the street.
The black man eventually said enough was enough. So what do we do about it? We tried the peaceful way. That didn't work. We had to do something about it.
The riots stopped, or there's lynching stopped, because the settling working class Caribbean people, after a while, said, no more of this. So they organized and they came out on the street and they began to fight back. At that point, the police thought, lots of trouble here, and they moved in and they moved everybody off the street. In 1959, there was a murder. There was a murder in Ladbroke Grove of a man called Kelso Cochrane by a group of young white men who attacked him. To this day, nobody has been arrested or prosecuted in the courts. And Claudia Jones was the person who organized a march, protests to Parliament, and actually started the spirit of the thing we now call the Carnival in London, indoors, in order to heal the rifts in community that she saw as happening.
Claudia Jones is one of the biggest people in local history, one of the most important people.
A lot of people talk about Claudia Jones because we know it's a big name now. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's on a stamp. So she's moved from being a real marginal person nobody knew about. She's so well known now that she's on a British stamp, Claudia Jones.
She actually had quite a lot of organisational skills, and I think she did a lot of work in pulling the West Indian community together.
She founded the West Indian Gazette and used it as a tool for organising people, for bringing people together.
And she was the influence behind introducing Carnival as an example of the way people could celebrate their existence without having to fight to be recognised.
My first experience of the carnival was like, wow, I've been reborn. The colours, the dances. I got behind the float and I swear to God, even if I didn't want to dance, I couldn't stop myself. My feet were just going patter, 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 patter. Beautiful. Couldn't stop. I was converted.
Carnival years ago was much better than it was today.
I remember one of the very first one. I was coming from Kilburn on a 28 bus down Great Western Road, and the bus had to stop. And we were upstairs and we looked through the front window, and there was one van with about 6 people behind it going like this, holding up the road.
I was lucky enough to see one of the very early carnivals, I'm thinking about 1972, which at that point was so small. You just suddenly heard steel bands playing and 2 or 3 lorries going down the road and people going after the lorries to see what was going on.
It was more for the people. You didn't have to pay to have a stall outside your house and sell your own food.
Unfortunately, it developed into what it is today, seen by many. And I definitely agree with that. It has a more business-like stamp all over it. We need to have the carnival because it's a way of letting out excess energy.
It's lovely to see the mixed nature of some of the steel bands. You know, when you see black and white people playing steel band together, you know big things are happening.
I first attended it back in 75. It was a community carnival.
76, I was on Basing Street outside Island Records. We were doing a little gig, and then somebody said, riot, said fight, start down on Acklam Road. So Basing Street's back there, Acklam Road's there. But the ripple, word of mouth. And so we said, Chester, get the van, and we start pack up all the gear. Because we know if he's going to use our stuff as missile. And we just pack up all the gear. It's the famous footage of where you see the kid hitting the police car.
Born and grow in England, back on my days I get raised in England. You saw me learn to go sing song, learn to beat bad boy with them in England. Nothing I go on in England, Babylon police are swarm in England. Gunshot a beat in England, bullet them a scrape on the street in England. Enough yard man come to England, come fi look a better life in England. Some do
having that kind of action on the streets of your area, it's extreme. It's a very extreme reaction to something. It doesn't come every day. It only comes because something in society is wrong.
Attacks, riots, have positive effects only where people resist.
All fight the power in England and stop fight one another in England.
And that's one of the things this community always had. When people attempted to put them into situations of disadvantage and victimage, they resisted. The positive comes when people resist injustice. Yeah? When people stand up for their rights. That's the positive.
After the riots, the carnival riots, it was all right. It was a good thing in the end.
So what was your first experience of carnival life?
I was scared of it. It was a bit, violent.
The first time I ever ventured into the carnival was 1981. My girlfriend at the time, she was the carnival queen. And she usually tells me off. Oh, every year you give me all this amount of money to go and buy costumes, and you never once come and see me. So I decided at carnival, I would go and see her costumes and take some photographs of her. And it was one of my biggest mistakes. Because when I got to Ladbroke Grove Station, everything was standstill. And when the crowd started moving, if you drop your keys, your money, whatsoever, forget about it, mate, because you'll get trampled over. And I made up my mind, I would never, ever venture into the carnival again.
I think it's absolutely wonderful way to get people together where they can eat, dance in the streets. I mean, it's brilliant seeing the police dancing in the streets.
Carnival is just for the colours, just people from everywhere just come together and they have fun, they dance. Some people get a bit freaked out by the crowd, but as long as you're aware that there are that many people and you kind of realise that and you're with friends, then it's the best. I love it.
It's in a funny kind of way the riots happen is negative. But the fight back against the riots becomes a positive thing. Because the real fruit is you had a community which became really alive to helping itself. It invented all these organizations, all over the place the organizations doing it. And I'm not talking about just black people in organizations. All the people, working class people, began to make organizations to defend themselves, to represent themselves.
And the kind of organizations that grew from people being appalled by what led up to the race riots are some of the most highly thought of charities that we have now.
They had to accept us because we became part of the community and they had to.
We're now standing in All Saints Road, London, West 11, which was the heart of Notting Hill and Ladbroke Grove, Westbourne Park area of action. And this is where the Mangrove restaurant was.
After the Mangrove restaurant came open, that was one of the first decent West Indian restaurants in London.
Coming to the Mangrove restaurant, which served traditional Caribbean food, you would have people like Sammy Davis Jr. and Nina Simone, so really big American stars.
When I was about 11-year-old, I was on my bike going around here, All Saints Road. I saw Bob Marley coming out of the Mangrove.
It was run by a man called Frank Critchlow.
Black people used to meet a lot, talk about things they were doing, and a place which the police would raid frequently.
Eventually, Frank Critchlow was awarded over £50,000 compensation for the number of times that his cafe had been raided without the police actually finding anything there.
I mean, the police attitude then was they were frightened of black people organising in any way.
When I was 13, this place was poor poor people lived in Ladbroke Grove and North Kensington. And the people who lived here were all living in massive numbers, lots of numbers in small spaces. But a very vital place at the same time. I don't think people were depressed, nobody was hunched over and behaving like life wasn't good. They were all full of optimism. They knew they were going to change their lives. It was really quite an exciting thing.
There was a real big peak of activity, late 60s and going into mid and late 70s. And the Frestonia was a big squatted area of houses in Latimer Road.
A long road, and all of the houses were squats, and it was all occupied by hippies.
In lots of ways, Frestonia was a kind of offshoot of the hippie movement. And of course, this area had a lot of hippies living in it in the 60s and 70s, when the hippie movement was alive and well in this country.
They declared themselves UDI and applied to the United Nations for independence, which they did not get.
There was drug taking going on in there, but there was calm, there's peaceful, there's no violence. The summer of love, people walking around naked down there, bare feet.
The interesting thing about it was squatting, of course, but radical sorts of people with all sorts of completely zany alternative ideas.
And one day my mate, he said to me, come to this cinema, they're showing Charlie Chaplin films for free. We went in there and it was all like hippies dancing around, like all high on acid. And we was like, what's going on here? We was like, but we didn't leave, we was in there. But they were showing the films, there was actually fun. No one was watching the films.
It included one guy who was the beginning of the fight against lead-free petrol. And he took BP to court because he said they were poisoning his child, right, with lead in petrol, And that eventually, as you know, led to lead-free petrol.
Frestonia was like, it's a one-off, it can't happen now.
It was a people's mass squat here, so lots of people just came and stayed here all day and had meetings, played music, gave out food and singing and dancing. I remember one guy called Tom Forthrop, who was living around here, very active in the community, and he stood up and he said, it is but a short step from the paddy fields of Vietnam to the Powis Square squat. Oh wow, I thought, man, that's fantastic, The consequence of that action was that the council gave in, and we now have this community gardens, which is still here.
When I first came to live here, I think I had the impression which you have, I think, in lots of bits of London, which is how extraordinary it is, how close different types of places are in London. You think you're in the richest part of London, you go one street down, you're in a completely different area. You think you're in a total shopping area, you take 8 steps and suddenly you seem to be in a complete sort of suburban enclave.
Now today, what you have is people with much more money than that, I call them the Notting Hill Billies, who've moved in and they're living on top of that cool vibe, that lovely vibe. They never think about where the vibe comes from. Other than they can buy into it. It's cool to be here. You can be here, you're moving around. Look, there are people from North Africa here, and there are people from the Caribbean here, and they're cool with us, we're cool with them kind of stuff. They have no idea of how this scene came to work out.
I originally had an idea of writing a film about a famous girl, and in fact I wanted the film to be called The Famous Girl, but it was described as the Notting Hill film just because I'm not very imaginative and I found it easier to set it in streets that I knew than streets that I didn't know. And then the guy who directed the film so liked the name Notting Hill that he wouldn't let me change it back.
I've lived around Ladbroke Grove for almost 20 years now. I always found this area of London to be really creative and multicultural. So there were a lot of musicians, actors, filmmakers, people in theatre living here.
Well, I live in 2 worlds here. I work right here on the corner of Portobello Road, so I'm right in the thick of, a big, noisy shopping street, where I think they have a university where they train people to fix roads, because they are always fixing roads. I think they come here, they do a year's practice in the street, and then they go and do it elsewhere. And then I walk 1,000 yards back to a little crescent with a church in it and only 3 houses and a communal garden, which is really quiet and sedate and lively, until my children wake up.
One of the things that attracted me to Kidulthood as a film, to make it, was because I found it very, very realistic. It was important to me that people who lived here watched that film and accepted it as being very, very close to the truth. As soon as we started casting the film, we used people from St Charles College. It was very clear to me that the kids really were looking at this as one of their own.
By calling it Notting Hill, we were slightly asking for trouble, because if you call something Notting Hill, people say, well, it must be a film about Notting Hill, and you haven't represented Notting Hill properly. Woody Allen made a movie called Manhattan, which is literally about Woody Allen and 3 other people. It doesn't make any effort to say, you know, here's Harlem, here's the Bronx, here's the Upper West Side.
I think there was a lot of mention made at that time that Richard Curtis's film didn't seem to have any black people in it, you know, and it was a portrayal of Portobello Road as being this kind of icy white, beautifully, like, you know, chocolate box version of Notting Hill, which everyone who lived here was like going, well, actually that's not really the case. You know, when we made Kidulthood, we made an attempt to redress that balance.
If I'd known that the audience were going to take the name more literally and more seriously, I might have thought harder about exactly who we were casting. I think that's probably true, and quite how we represented it. But it didn't occur to me when I was writing the film that anyone would ever think it was a film about Notting Hill, because I thought it was going to be called something else.
Ladbroke Grove has been a big artistic influence on me. In terms of influence, everywhere you look around in Ladbroke Grove, there are things to look at. There are different people, different experiences to take away and use in my artwork.
Ladbroke Grove has inspired me so many times to write.
People have noticed that out of Ladbroke Grove in North Kensington, there is a kind of quite a vital artistic, cultural community thing happening.
I grew up with my parents playing music, sent to piano lessons at the age of 5, went to church and heard music, so it's always been part of my life.
And of course in big cities like London, whichever area you're in, particularly the centre, people are very closed off. So music brings such fun and happiness and joy to people.
When new people come into a society, if they try to break into the powerful places of the economy or the powerful places of politics, it's hard. You know, they have to wait a while before they know how to work that out. Often there are prejudices stopping them. The big space that is open that nobody can stop them getting into is the cultural space.
Irish people with their music and in themselves have made a very good impact in this area because they're very open and warm people, and you can pass that on.
The older generation, they always used to have like what they call blues. They used to gather on weekends, just friends from the villages back home in Jamaica, and they'd gather on like a Saturday and they'd play dominoes and play music on a system what they call a blues spot. So you get to hear music. You always hear music around you.
Blues, yeah, had a lot of blues. You know, you had clubs you could go to weekend. It was all boogieing, bookie from Forest Square to Colville Terrace. It was really nice in those days, you know.
My name is Paul and I'm a barber. The reason why we started our business in Ladbroke Grove, there is a high population of Afro-Caribbean people. So we knew we didn't have enough clients. You know, the area is quite young.
I'm an artist who's lived and worked around Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill, all around West London for the whole of my life.
My name is Kevin Davis, otherwise known as KD, and this actual place here, the Tabernacle, is where I spent most of my youth. We was in there, we was breakdancing in here with the Rocksteady crew when they first came over. The first graffiti was done around here, you know, like the New York style, Futura 2000. So they influenced us. So we started doing what they was doing and we took it to another level. We done our own thing and carried on from there, kind of thing.
A lot of history. Kind of like the area. It's mixed flavour of people of all ethnicities around here.
I think the different cultures in this area get along really well. There's definite separation between people in terms of religions and faiths, which is to be expected, I think, wherever you go in the world. But in terms of learning, in terms of living, loving, people get on.
Yeah, we get all types of people coming to this barbershop. We get Americans, some Russians, some Polish, you know, the usual African and Caribbean, but like from all over Africa.
You know, I grew up with Spanish people, Portuguese, West Indian people, English people. I grew up with so much different people, Greeks, Chinese.
I think youth culture has essentially changed because the music's changed. Youth culture in the past, I think it was more reggae orientated, where like now reggae's taken a backseat, or it's like it's influencing other music scenes now. It's influencing grime. I don't think the youth are very happy. To even call their music grime, it's not really a good look.
I think this barbershop is important to the community because it provides a service. Everyone needs to cut their hair, but as well as that, like, in a way, it's a kind of social barbershop where like everyone feels at ease to talk about literally anything within these four walls. Like, you'd be surprised the kind of political conversations that happen in this place.
Is actually known as Little Morocco. There's stuff like fish, date produce, tea, couscous, and a diversity of other beautiful dishes.
I was born in 1949 in a small seaside town in northern part of Morocco called Larache. When I first landed at Heathrow Airport in February 1973, it was a very foggy night. I seemed to sort of thinking at the time, well, this is exactly how I saw it in those films of Sherlock Holmes. And all the Moroccans who were newcomers, they came to live in North Kensington area so they could be near each other and they drew strength and support from each other.
I actually consider Ladbroke Grove and this part of North Kensington to be an example, you know, throughout the world for you know, a well-integrated and a very, very cohesive community.
Well, I've been here 50 years, so how long ago is that?
Well, I was born in the neighbourhood.
She was born. I wasn't.
87 years ago. Everybody knew everybody, everybody was friendly. Anybody could walk in, walk out. We was all mates. Today, what you don't leave your front door open. You've got to make sure it's closed and locked before you walk away from it.
Yeah, true.
Otherwise you'll come back and find your flat's empty.
We had all the shops down here.
All the shops.
David Gregg.
David Gregg's, Perks's, Holmes's, Baker's.
Baker over there. Things going on.
And what is it now? It's all flats or houses, such as that monstrosity up there. And that is supposed to be a listed building. Just look at it.
In those days, when I used to go in the pub with my friends after cricket, because I was a cricket fanatic, you could have got 21 pints of lager for £1 and still got back change.
There are a lot of people who are older people who don't like the change that's happened in Ladbroke Grove, and they tend to make it sound like, well, I don't like all these rich people coming in and taking over the space and so on. But actually, I think what they're bemoaning is the sense of community that used to be here.
Before you have families living in the same house, sharing the same entry door, the children playing outside together, and it was more community spirited.
London is my home now. I miss Ireland very much. My heart is always there, and then when I'm away, my heart is here because I love the warmth of the people and the openness.
Well, my feelings about Ladbroke Grove haven't changed as much as how the place has changed.
It was very, very vibrant and energetic and creative, which it still is, but I have to say, because the confrontation and change the world ideas aren't there, I mean, instead of these really interesting bookshops, we got these, well, natty little shops selling, what are they, designer clothes, I suppose, you know.
I was talking to a woman though who's been coming on my walks for some years, and she's lived in Notting Hill since the 1950s. She commented that all her neighbours used to be interesting, creative people, and now they're all city bankers.
It's lost a lot of its sort of cultural spark, really. You know, it used to be where a lot of musicians and artists used to live, and there was a real buzz about it when I first moved here, you know.
If the forces that came in with the Notting Hill Billies kind of persevere, then all that, the vitality of working class North Kensington can be, you know, it can be pushed out, it can go somewhere else, you know, none of it can remain. Yes? If that is not what happens, then something else might emerge, yes? One can look for the new layers, the new sets, the new groups of people who come in as migrants to settle in this area. And in a way, that is the present, yes, that is likely to define the future of Ladbroke Grove.
There's so many things happening in this area, so many different. You can sit in one spot and nothing will ever be the same. It's constantly changing. And if you're an artist, there's so many things around here that just lifts everything up for you. You just want to create something.
When I hear the word Ladbroke Grove, I think about Carnival and Portobello Road Market and all the exciting things that happens around. It's quite a lovely place.
I think you'll hear a lot of people say that the Portobello Road is becoming more boutique, less real. I think it's pretty brilliant how slowly that's happening, but that may just be to me, but it's quite like it was when I first moved in here. I can see some great shops have gone, some more expensive shops have come in, but what we feared was going to happen, which was that it was just going to become a series of, you know, McDonald's and Gabs and everything like that, doesn't seem to me to have occurred.
Maybe it's just me, but in Notting Hill, there is a black and white mix, and it's been sorted out from the 58 riots, where blacks and whites, we get on, but if you just step out the area and probably go Harrow Road or Kilburn, you get some strange looks because there's a different kind of vibe.
That rich history that we have here, it's a pity that it isn't known by new generations coming through. The kinds of things that have come out of Ladbroke Grove, nationally important. The carnival that's grown up here, internationally important. Our local history happens to be not just a pilly little in the corner local history, it happens to be a grand, our local is global.
I lived around here since 1958 and I won't change it for the world. I won't live anywhere else.
The history of this area is immense, and it's something that needs to be told and needs to be, you know, we all need to stick up for it and be proud of it and move forward with it.
History is the past, it is the present, and it is the future. I'm not playing that as a joke. That's not just playing with words. It's important so that young people like you should know that you are in history. You are makers of history. What you're doing is going to turn out to be past history.
Enough yard man come to England, come fi look a better life in England. Some do good in England, some sell drugs in the hood in England. BNP in England, National Front Party in England. Fuck free politics in England, dictatorship in England. In England, 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 England. In England, 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 England. Yo, them sing save the Queen in England, we sing save me in England. Carry the salvation, we be one our next generation. When the have all we right in England, so we need to unite in England. All fight the power in England, and stop fight one another in England. In England, 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 England. In England, 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 England. In England, 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 England. In England, 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 England.